because believe it or not, she is the only full-time commercial real estate agent in the state of or in the city of Louisville, Kentucky. Hello, and welcome to Mornings with Joel, Commercial Real Estate Podcast, where we focus on rising stars and established players in commercial real estate and talk to them about how they are building legacies in today's marketplace. Hello, welcome everyone to the Mornings with Joel CRE Podcast. We're really excited to have you back. Another week of exciting information and guests on the show. And today we have a special guest from Louisville, Kentucky, and this is Bridget Owens. And you might say, well, who is Bridget? Why Lexington? I'm not Lexington. Why Louisville, Kentucky, and all this good stuff? There's a reason. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. And Bridget, welcome. We're so excited to have you with us today. How you doing?
I am doing well. We are getting ready for Derby. As you see, the Derby post here, we'll be getting ready for next week. So the festivities already start in Louisville for it.
Yeah. Actually, I've flown into your airport before, and there's Kentucky Derby stuff everywhere.
Yes,
So it's almost like going to Vegas with slot machines everywhere. It's crazy.
absolutely. Bourbon everywhere.
Yep, absolutely. So looking forward to getting back up that way. Actually, you know what? This is totally off subject, but wound up going up there and seeing the solar eclipse not too long ago.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So y'all were kind of in that path and it drove into some part of southern Indiana in order to see it. But anyway, that's like I said, that don't have nothing to do with nothing we're talking about today. So, but for you guys listening, I wanted to have Bridget Owens on because believe it or not, she is the only full-time commercial real estate agent in the state of or in the city of Louisville, Kentucky. And when I first heard that, I was like, come on, give me a break, right? But we often talk about how BIPOC individuals only make up about 3%. Some people say 6% of the overall industry, which would mean some of these smaller cities don't have any representation from that standpoint. So I thought this was an interesting conversation to have and see how she's doing out there with this type of situation. Well, Bridget, let me let you introduce yourself and then I'll ask you a couple of other questions related to your background. So who are you, first of all?
Well, of course, my name is Bridget Owens, and I am actually originally from Memphis, Tennessee. I went to Spelman in Atlanta, so I have a little Atlanta connection. But I have been in Louisville for the past 25 years. My husband and I have raised our families here. My first career was education. And I retired about 3 years ago as a elementary principal. So that was my first act, and commercial real estate is my second act.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So you've been at it in commercial real estate, and you gave us that little background, so we certainly appreciate it. How would you say that the transition was to go from kind of dealing with, I guess as a principal, you're not just dealing with the students and having to keep them in line, because sometimes dealing with clients can feel like dealing with children. But how has that transition been for you to go from being a principal of a school into commercial real estate?
So it was a tough transition, just because I tell people all the time I help manage like 80 people. 80 people, 80 to 90 people were working for me, with me,
Mhm.
and when I got into this arena, it was just me, and trying to transition to that. So my office staff at my school had me spoiled. I didn't know how to scan. I was not technology savvy because they were all doing those things for me. But, I definitely had a learning curve, but, I figured it out. So, it was just, knowing that I wanted to do it and doing it. But also there were a lot of skills that I learned as a principal, as you were saying, the children, the parents, learning how to, navigate that. I was in what we call a affluent school, where I actually started the school 20 years ago.
Oh,
So
okay.
I was able to, yeah, I did the picking out of the colors of the school, all of the teachers, the curriculum, all of that. So that was like a labor of love, but it kind of prepared me for the position I'm in now. So, there are a lot of, I tell people all the time in education, we have so many skills that we've learned through training that we can transfer. And sometimes people in education feel like they are just pigeonholed, but we're not. We can, move those things into different areas like I did.
Yeah, yeah. So that's interesting. So that's how the transition was. But why commercial real estate? Most people when they go out to do something in real estate, they either want to flip houses or they wind up being residential real estate agents, which that's a pretty crowded space. Why commercial? Why did you find this to be your level of interest?
So it's funny you should say that because, well, first of all, my husband and I are investors.
Okay.
We are commercial, real estate investors. When I started in 2016 investing, I started with a commercial space that actually I used to get my hair done, and this lady, the hairstylist, was selling her building, and it was like mixed use.
Okay.
And she couldn't sell it, and I kept looking at it, I was like, I think I ought to buy this. This is a good time. My daughter's going to college for me to kind of stick my toe into this real estate game. And so I bought that, and then I bought a house for a friend to stay in. And I was like, I'm just going to see which one I like better.
Yeah.
And for me, commercial just was a better fit because I was still working. We were still busy. I still had another child at home. And, with commercial, it might take a minute to get it leased out. But once it's leased out, it's pretty much, on the tenant to do things as far as plumbing issues, anything in the inside. And so it just worked for us. And so that's kind of how I started. And then I just started kind of picking up a few more pieces here and there. So when I decided I wanted to retire, I was like, I think everybody was telling me you really need to go into real estate. And I'll be honest with you, Joel, I was thinking of residential. I mean, that's because that's what
Yeah.
females
Like,
journey
yeah.
too. And I was like, I didn't even because I didn't get excited about thinking about taking somebody to like 10 different houses for them to complain about the color or
Yeah.
the way it's sitting on the lot and things like that. But I just assumed that's what I needed to do.
Right.
So my friend, who also was my agent for commercial real estate, said, "Well, Bridget, have you ever thought about doing commercial real estate?" And it had never occurred to me. Now, at that point, my husband and I probably owned maybe 20, 25 doors, in commercial,
Mhm.
um, buildings and things, and still did not think about doing that. Never made the connection. And, so she brought me in and, spoke with the firm that I'm in now, PRG Commercial Property Advisors. And I just felt like it was a great fit, and, I just went from there.
Okay. Okay. All right. And I guess when you walk in the door in the market, people are still like, okay, who else is with you, right? Or
Yeah.
are you the agent?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, absolutely. And my first thing was and we talked about this, is to find a mentor because I was, my firm was great I mean, they are definitely one of the forefront of having females. We have female property managers, female agents. We probably have more than most in the city, but I wanted to find somebody that looked like me
Mhm.
to kind of give me their perspective. And so I was just as surprised as you were, Joel, when I said, well, let me find, I'm sure I can find one. And I looked and I looked and I looked and I could not find one. And they're great agents here who have been doing this for years. And I ended up going back to Memphis and connecting with someone I didn't know, but we had mutual friends who, is in the commercial real estate arena in Memphis. He still mentors me now. And I didn't realize, you're talking about 3 years ago, 2022, that, I would be making these strides for hopefully that will be able to help others, come in and do. So within a couple of months, I had seasoned agents who maybe were, or residential, but are kind of doing residential and a little commercial, calling me, asking me to go out to, for coffee so they could pick my brain. I was like, well, I don't know enough now to because
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure it out myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, that sounds really good. Let me ask you this. Do you think buying and owning commercial real estate first has helped you become a better agent, or is it really insignificant or irrelevant, I should say? Because a lot of agents don't own real estate. They're just selling the real estate. So, do you think that that's helped you being a commercial owner and investor in being an effective agent?
Absolutely. It's helped me, first of all, I think to scale as quickly as I've scaled up
Mhm.
because I know what, a seller or buyer, clients want you to answer the phone. They want you to get their property leased. They don't want to be looking for you. They want you to be proactive, all those kinds of things. And I think that has kind of helped me be able to, expand as quickly as I did. And also it kind of helped me, I didn't just come in, a lot of our agents come in and they don't have any experience in commercial real estate. And so my level of expertise was a little different coming in, at least had been on the client side. So I understood a lot of those things. And I think that's, definitely has helped me to be able to empathize with my clients. When you're paying a note on a building that's not leased, it doesn't really impact you if you're the agent, but if
Yeah,
you're
you're
the
right.
client, you want, you're like, I'm paying this note and there's a sense of urgency.
Yeah.
And so I probably take on a little more of that emotional piece than most because I know how it feels on the other side. So, if I know a lot of agents don't call their clients until maybe they have, somebody that's actually going to lease. But I always call when, if somebody, I say, you know what, so and so just called and, inquired about it. We have a showing tomorrow. I will follow up with you. I do all of those things because people want to hear, they want communication, constant communication that you're working it instead of just being what we call a listing agent.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, very true. Very true. Because when you don't hear, the perception is always, well, they're not working on my
Mhm.
stuff. And like you said, if you're paying that note every month and you feel like your agent ain't working, that fuse gets shorter and shorter. The
Absolutely.
patience fuse, if you will. So that's good to know. So that might be something to keep in mind. I mentioned to you before that one of the I don't know if I should necessarily call it a mandate, but one of the objectives of the show is to help the generation coming behind us, right? And to give them the insight. And maybe that's something to think about. Maybe buy a small commercial property just to get started and see what it's really all about so that you can help from the other side of the table and understand both sides of the table. So that's good.
So, and one thing I would say, and this is what I did, and I think it's when people say, well, because when people think of commercial real estate, they think that you need to spend, $1 million or $2 million on a property. And I feel like the best way to get your feet wet and just to count the best entryway into commercial real estate is buying office condos.
Mhm.
And that's actually how we started. My husband and I, after we bought the multi-use, we start buying office condos, and they're running, anywhere from 100,000 to $150,000, and people can kinda wrap their head around that.
Mhm.
And, also the cash flow is good. If you get an office condo, at a great price, you've got great cash flow. It might not appreciate like a traditional office building, but you have great cash flow and, you usually can get them, leased out. We're not having any problems with getting, these smaller units leased out even after COVID.
Okay. All right. And that actually opens up a whole nother door of discussion, about the office market. And the reason why is one of my most successful clients has done extremely well in that small office space. She doesn't own just like a couple of them. She owns hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of space of these smaller type of unit. And then last week, ironically enough, we had a guest on that was a former WeWork executive, and they were talking about what they're doing with office space. And I know you were talking about these smaller condos, but talk to me a little bit. I wanted to save this for later in the discussion, but you've opened up the door. What is the office market looking like in Louisville right now? You mentioned small is doing good. What about larger space? I mean, do you have any data on that or any ideas to how that market is looking these days?
Let me kind of back up to 2020, and the Breonna Taylor, what happened there during,
Mhm.
so right after that, downtown was like a ghost town for us. I mean, it looked like a battle zone with, boarded up, buildings, it was just really, I mean, it didn't even look like our city. That's what happened, right in 2020. It was really, really difficult. It has since bounced back some, but, even our firm where, we might lease out downtown, maybe, a attorney's office that,
Mhm.
is leasing out 8,000 square feet, which sounds great, but guess what? They're moving from
20
30,000.
or 30, yeah.
Yeah. So the city even, came up with some incentives, where, they would pay, a certain amount per square foot if somebody was signing a long-term lease. And I do believe that they got some, but they still are struggling. Not as much, but we still have very large spaces downtown that are vacant. What we found is the trend is that people are doing hybrid kinds of working now. They don't the 10,000 square feet, and now people want to be closer to home.
Mhm.
So I have a lot of clients who have office buildings in the East End, as we call it, that, you couldn't get anybody in there. I mean, you couldn't pay anybody to get in there. Now, people are wanting to be closer to home. Maybe they were, and then we have some that were maybe been at home since COVID, and their wife and their kids are saying, you know what, you're gonna have to get out if we're going, we're gonna survive. So anyway, and what I have found is that like the larger office spaces, when I say larger, like 8 to 10,000 square feet in the East End, they used to sit. They are, they're going really fast because they moved from downtown.
Okay.
And so we struggle probably like any other city with that,
Mhm.
we're still trying to, figure that out, and, trying to get people to, consider, going back downtown because, that just helps with the restaurants and with, all the evening activities and things like that. But it definitely has shifted.
Gotcha, gotcha. So, yeah, we're kinda hearing that in the majority of the country where, people are wanting some type of hybrid work option, which is why you would think that a WeWork type scenario would work. And I don't wanna just keep emphasizing them, I'm just using the name because people are familiar with it. But having that shift is important, and helping people to capitalize on that and giving them what they want so that they don't quit and go take another job. Because some companies were faced with that where the employer would say you have to be here 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and people say, okay, here's my resignation, I'm moving on. So it's kind of interesting. So let's look at the dichotomy between that and this smaller office space. Could you mention office condos? What's the average square foot of an office condo that you're seeing is being leased out pretty quickly?
Generally, it's about less than 1,000 square feet. You might could get a couple at 1,200, but, about 1,000, less about 1,000 or so square feet, and you're looking at, like, $1,500 a month, something that people can generally wrap their heads around,
Yeah.
and those just go, I mean, I don't have any problems getting those leased out. A lot of times, I have a client where he bought it was, like, right before Christmas, he was headed to out of the country, we saw the, office condo. He bought it, and then I said, "Well, we really gotta get this, we gotta remodel and things like that." He was still gone, I helped, kinda orchestrate all of that, and we got a tenant in before he closed, that was a happy, that was a real happy client. But
Right.
it just happened just like that because people, they can they can see themselves, I can pay $1,500. I might can't pay, $10,000, but
Right.
I can pay 1,500.
Yeah, yeah, and that makes sense. So when you look at that, and you mentioned about that price point, and I completely get it. You can buy. I don't know what the average home price is in Louisville. I would think it's probably maybe 200 to 250. And if you can buy a home, or excuse me, if you can buy an office and have cash flow for half of that, I mean, yeah, it becomes something where, instead of me maybe buying this other home that I can, lease out to somebody, I can actually buy a commercial space, which is actually easier to manage than a residential property. By, hands down easier, from that standpoint. So it's interesting how that's coming together. Let me ask you this though: who is your client in a situation like that? Are we talking about people who don't want to go back to the office, but their spouse and children are saying you got to get out the house because we're tired of you being here, and they're just leasing a little office condo instead of driving all the way downtown, or is it self? I think I know the answer, but I want you to tell me. You know what
Well,
what
it's
what you
both.
see?
It's both.
Okay.
It is what I was saying before, but also and I think this has a lot to do with us coming out of COVID. I've been leasing a lot to therapists, uh,
Okay.
across the city, sorry, that, and they're growing. They are, continuing to grow. But it's just a combination, of somebody that, but they all want to be in close proximity to their home now as
Okay.
compared to before.
I was gonna say, what in the world's going on in Louisville that you guys need so many therapists? What's up with that?
I know, right? But they
Mhm.
do I do I lease a lot to therapists. I
Really?
really do.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Interesting. So, all right. So you said it's a mixed bag. So you have people that are not wanting to go into the office every day, but then you also have what other type of client? Because I know it's not just therapists, but that would fall in the small business category from that standpoint. So, is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, and I also like, attorneys, and maybe they're branching out. I've leased a lot to them.
Mhm.
People who is doing startups. I had one, client, or tenant that wanted to do something, some kind of, something with China, but the tariffs, I mean, he closed before within, like, 6 months because of the tariffs and things. But just anybody that wants to start a small business,
Mhm.
or sometimes they just need, a Google address. I found a lot of people, that need that. I have one of my investors who instead of making he did so well with the individual spaces, like an individual office space, but then they have shared like conference room, restrooms
Yeah.
and things
Mhm.
like that. He decided to do, another one because it was so successful, and, it's in a high-end area, and a lot of people just need Google addresses.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. All right. Well, that sounds good. Sounds good from that standpoint. So, what would you say is your niche? And um, you mentioned a lot about leasing. Do you do any sales at all, or is it primarily just leasing?
It's both. And so, and Joel, one of the things coming into a well-established, firm that I did, I had to find where my people were, where my peeps were, as you would
Uh-huh.
say.
Hmm.
And, we have a strong presence in multifamily. So, that just was not a space that I could command here, that I could get into, unless I have just a special client. So I really came in. And that's one of the things when you're with a strong firm, you're like, well, where do I fit in? How do I get my people? And so I started with, of course, with the office condo, but I've moved kind of past. I still do that, but not as much. Um, and my focus more is on, office buildings and retail. I do a lot of retail as well. Leasing is kind of call it my it's kind of, it helps with the, because you got your sales, but then leasing's kind of that kind of keeps you going,
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
I try to do both, but a couple of years ago, well, maybe 2 you want after my first year, I was like, I think my first year I might have done like 30 transactions, and that was leasing and selling. And then my second year, I might have done 70 or 80 transactions, but some of them were really small. And I was like, I can't work any harder. I got to work smarter. So, I started, even though I still do those, I started trying to focus on, those larger deals, but also, leasing is my bread and butter. It kind of keeps keeps the lights on
Yeah.
while we're going for those big deals. But trying to figure out, you know, how do I do that? But then how do I focus on, trying to do some larger things? So last year is kind of when I started to do that.
Mhm.
And, I tell people all the time in this business, you don't need if you have a good 5 to 10 good investors, you don't need a ton of people because investors are always buying, they're always selling, they're always leasing. It's just a circle.
Right.
So I really tried to focus on getting some clients that, are part of that cycle. And one of my clients that I had he had actually had like he had like 3 or 4 different agents doing different things. Like one was managing this strip center, one was managing this office building, one was and so we developed a relationship where he said, "Bridget, I want you to do all of it." And, then it's just like one point person. So honestly, if you have 2 or 3 people like that, you don't need anybody else. So my focus, like I said, has been on, office buildings. I've kind of graduated from the office condos. I still do them, but, office buildings and strip centers. And that is we haven't talked about that, but retail strip centers are definitely hot. If I had 10, I could probably sell them in a couple of weeks. Everybody wants, a strip center.
Okay. All right. Let's dive into that a little bit, but let's take a quick pause for a word from our sponsor. The Morning for Joe Theory podcast is sponsored by ImpactMask.com. That's M as in Mary, ImpactMask.com. The world's most breathable mask that has 99% efficacy, which is higher than an N95 mask, and it won't fog your glasses. Check out the science behind these incredible masks at ImpactMask.com. All right, fantastic. So the retail market now, you and I have both been around long enough to know about the hills and valleys in commercial real estate. Retail initially got crushed early on during the financial crisis, but a lot of the impact on the success of retail was the Amazon effect, which obviously hurt the malls and other things from that standpoint. But you mentioned retail is doing well. What type of retail and what type of strip shopping centers in Louisville? Because there's a lot of diversity in that type of market in retail.
So, I would say the smaller retail, shops kind of parallel to when we talk about office buildings.
Mhm.
Um, you know, I don't tend to have a problem leasing out, smaller retail centers, in the, you know, 1,500 to, 5 or 6,000 square feet. Anything from leased one out to someone that's starting a high-end, furniture company. I have, somebody else that's, some kind of, environmental firm that wants to be in a retail like, center.
Mm.
Medical, we have a lot of, urgent care, facilities that want to be in retail. So, we just don't seem to have a problem and surely don't have we don't even have the inventory as far as selling. Everybody wants to keep their strip centers. And
Mm.
when I have them for lease, I still have agents calling to see if my client will sell.
Really?
Mhm.
Okay. All right. I haven't heard that in a lot of the country, so that's interesting to know. Because you always, at least in my mind, trying to figure out what makes a market unique. And I don't know much about the Louisville market. As I said, when I was there, it had nothing to do with real estate anyway. Um, but I think that's quite interesting. So there's a demand for retail. How are the malls doing in Louisville? Are they doing well or struggling, or what's going on in that regard?
What's so
No, you
ironic?
might not know. Yeah.
I do know that just by passing by them. What's so ironic, Joel, they're doing well.
Really?
They are doing well, and it was interesting, I was back home in Memphis, and I saw that the ones that were very popular were not, and I told my husband, I said, "Look at this." I mean, these are, not they didn't have, like, a national, maybe they had the national, tenants at the, anchored, but, like, the inside of the mall had just, very local, stores in it, and that's not us. And I think, we don't have a lot, but I think they've also been smart to put, very nice restaurants, on those, outlet parcels. Like, we have, Capital Grill, just it's been there for about 2 years. We have
Mhm.
Cheesecake Factory, all of those that, draw, and then we have Top Golf that draws people to them. So, our malls, from what I can see, are flourishing.
Hmm. Okay. All right. Very interesting. Very interesting. All right. What else would you like us to know about the market up there in Louisville? Should a person look to Louisville as a good place to invest? Certain parts of the country, you kind of view as like flyover states. So, what would you say is the draw to Louisville outside of the Kentucky Derby? Happening once a year.
I think people can wrap their heads around, almost like homes, you don't have to have a ton of money to get into the market here, and I think that's what makes it, very appealing. We have, clients from California, who cannot afford to purchase, real estate in California, investing in our market because, we have, we're pretty stable, it's easier to get into. We haven't really talked about it, and you were talking about Amazon, which is everywhere, and of course after 2020, you know, industrial was very hot, and
Yep.
it is still very hot here.
Okay.
Actually, yeah. Actually, my, a couple of, colleagues in my firm have, built several, very successful industrial warehouses. We also do that, and they don't have a problem, with getting, those leased out as well. So, that's an area, and I don't know if you're familiar with the new Ford plant that is going in big to do here. They're gonna be making, like, Ford battery for the, electric cars.
Okay.
So, they are needing, warehouse space and things like that. So, I don't that's not an area that I'm really in, but I do know that it's still very, needed and it's very, very popular.
Okay. Okay. But this idea of you also being the only person of color in the Louisville market, again, just kind of surprising. But why do you think that is? And you mentioned also about multifamily and not going into that. Uh, what was your decision making behind that as to not go into multifamily? Because that's there's a lot of activity in that space. So I just want to cover those 2 points and kind of get your thoughts on that.
And so the reason I have not gone into multifamily because when I came to the firm, they pretty that was pretty much saturated.
Okay.
They had all the clients. So that's really the only reason I have not, gotten into multifamily. Like I said, coming here, it was kind of like trying to find where my niche was.
Right.
And, one of my colleagues I mean, she's a rock star with real estate, but more importantly with multifamily. So I just kind of just stayed out of her territory because, there just wasn't I didn't have anybody to get. So, maybe if I were somewhere else, it would be different, but, I just needed to kind of focus in on where I felt like I could, make my growth, and so that's the only reason. Multifamily is very hot. It just was not, it was just kinda hard to break into in this, being here, and, but office, and retail, there was definitely some opportunities there, which I was able to seize.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Yeah. That
There was
makes sense.
something else she said, I can't remember you said that.
Yeah. Well, I was wondering why do you think that there are not other persons of color that have decided to jump into the commercial real estate space in Louisville? I'm just curious about that. What are your thoughts on that as to why that might be the case up there in that market? Any idea, or is it just not that big of a city to have that many people come in? There's quite a few black folks up there, I know.
Yeah.
So
And I don't know. I just don't know. I know, it can be very intimidating, when you're in a room. I mean, I go to a lot of those meetings, and I'm the only person of color in the meeting. It can be very intimidating. And, for me, the first couple of years, I didn't make much money. I'm gonna be honest with you. This is my second career as I've told you. So I was kind of able to supplement, until I was able to, start making money.
Mhm.
And I'll be honest with you, I've learned a lot. I have a couple of real residential real estate friends who I've kind of model after, and the little money I did make, I put back into my business with advertising and things like that. And everybody's not at the point where they can do that. It was kind of rough, at the
Yeah.
beginning. I guess it's that, and I don't know other than, feeling like they just don't have access, and that's my goal is to, help as many people as I can know that this, can be done. If I can do it, you can do it. Now, I'll be honest with you, I grind. I mean, I hustle and I grind.
Yeah.
I grind all the time. And I took things, and I think we talked about this, that most people would not want to take. So I could, you know, get the experience and hopefully, get other clients. A perfect example is when I came to the firm, I was given a client, and I think he had been a client here before, but they were kind of transitioning. And so I took him, and that was like one of the best decisions I had made because we are still working together now. And his network is so large, that it's helped me to get more and more clients. And so, it just, it takes, you don't get the 3 and $5 million deals when you first start off, You know, y I've had, commission checks that were, $75, Uh, but, and at the beginning, I would tell my broker, I said, "But I want these larger deals, where are these larger deals? Because 'Cause I'm working so hard." He said, "Bridget, the same amount of work you're putting in these smaller deals, you're gonna put in these larger deals, and it is just preparing you for that."
Yeah.
And so, now I do see, the larger deals coming. I've done some off-market transactions, like I just did one with, which and these are probably more the gratifying ones where
Mhm.
we have a local nonprofit who wanted to purchase all of the land surrounding one of their complexes. And so I had to get in touch with the owner who owned it. And what was so interesting about this whole thing was, Joel, that and this was like almost a $5 million deal. And it took us probably a year, a year and a year or so to get this done. But what was so interesting is that, we talk about owning the block. You really cannot make an impact if you're just owning just a section of a block. In order for you to really make an impact, you need to own all of it. And so we negotiated for over a year. We finally got it closed. And at closing, the seller told us that it had been in his family for 4 generations.
Mm.
This is, he happened to be white, for 4 generations, and a, minority, nonprofit bought it
Mm.
and is going to be able to do all kinds of economic development. So, those are the special deals that mean so much when I can do that. I did another one where there was a medical, like a medical center, and they wanted a community center, medical community center, and they wanted the property across the street for them to be able to provide fresh fruits and vegetables for the community. And I was able to, that was another off market deal, to navigate through that too, and get them to the closing. So those, the retail and the office, those are great, but also those things where you can make a meaningful
Mhm.
impact to the community. But both of those deals took a year. So
Yep.
I go back to saying, you really, it's tough at first, to kind of get those things going. So I think that's probably one of the reasons that, because sometimes it's easier to sell a house.
Yeah. Yeah, you generally don't work on a residential house sale for a year.
You know,
Unless there's some really, really big problem that you're dealing with. So, so it makes sense. I mean, it's bigger reward in some cases, but more work too. So,
absolutely.
yeah, so you got to look at that. Well, that's that's pretty insightful, everything that you've been able to share today. Um, the market is unique. I appreciate you giving us some insight as to, what's going on up there. There's a club that I'm part of, and we have different meetings around the country, and we're always saying, okay, well, where's another good place to go? and we generally look for areas that have a concentration of BIPOC members that might be able to attend our meetings and maybe become members and whatnot. And Louisville's a little down on the list from what you're saying, but that might change over time as others are encouraged to get into the commercial real estate space. Let me ask you this, Bridget. In concluding, what do you want folks to know? Why do you think it's important to get your message out there about Louisville, the market, yourself? What would you want us to walk away with today?
Well, and I don't wanna downplay Louisville. Louisville is a great city. It's a great place, I think, to start in investing, if you have never considered it. Also, I still think that there are lots of opportunities for brokers, for real estate agents, to get into this market.
Mhm.
I just think that a lot of times maybe it just has not, kind of like with me in starting thinking that I wanted to be a residential agent and only own my house. Just I just never had thought about it. So hopefully just opening people's eyes to this is an option, and if I can do it, you can do it. It's work, but if I can do it, you can do it. And what I will say is that we have a lot of companies, nonprofits or for profits, minority businesses that purchase real estate, and now they have somebody that they can call. And I would like for it to be more than just me that they can call to get deals done. And so I definitely think that there's opportunity here. I think the city is a city where I tell people all the time that you feel like you can conquer it as compared to maybe a Atlanta or DC where you have to kind of stand in line,
Right.
to and it's not like that here. People are very open. There's lots of opportunity. You just have to be, you know, be there, be in the right places, and seize the opportunity. And I have been blessed to have people to put me in the right places and, to speak my name when I'm not
Mhm.
there. And that is the most important thing when you have people in power that speak your name when you're not around advocating for you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's big because I'm sure. Like you said, you walk into certain meetings and you're the only one there. It could feel a little uncomfortable sometimes. Of course, I've been in those type situations as well. But if you know your stuff, it really doesn't matter, right? You can get out there and do what you got to do, and you've had a degree of success in your market, and I'm sure you're going to continue to grow and do well. And so that's outstanding. Yeah. So we're happy for you. We're proud that you decided to be that pioneer to get on out there. And maybe even I know you had some background with CCIM and the Urban League and some of the other organizations there. Um, do you think it's a value for individuals to kind of help out with that as well, and be part of those organizations and expand their reach into commercial real estate?
I think so. I think it's good for you. I think networking is good. What has helped me is, in my networking, even when I was as a principal, just the people that I met. And, I think I've always wanted to help people. If somebody calls me, I try to help people, and people have done that in turn. Just promoting yourself. I've done a lot. Social media has been great for me,
Mhm.
just putting out there what I sold, putting out there what I'm leasing, and people talk, and the thing about it is if they're not buying, they know somebody who's buying or who's selling. And so all of those things, are very helpful. They have tons of networking events,
Mhm.
around the city. I think those are, but I think honestly, Joe, I think the most important thing is just when you get a client, do them right, do what you're supposed to do, and they will be your best advertisement. I tell people all the time, when you don't do well, they tell 15 people. When you do well, they tell 5.
Yeah,
And
or
so,
50.
yeah, so they are, and I have, I try to do well, and that really has helped where I have people to call me all the time. You help you sold so and so for my friend. Can you help me? Of course. And nothing's too small, nothing's too big. I just do the best I can.
Okay, all right. Well, it's always good to have that type of repeat business and build those relationships. That's kind of how I got started in the industry. There wasn't a big marketing budget, but it was, like you said, boots on the ground and hustling and getting out there and meeting people, and one thing led to another. So that's what you got to do. I'm going to throw you one curveball here at the end, but this is something that you put out there, so you shouldn't be too uncomfortable by it. Do you speak German?
Do I speak German?
Yeah, the German American
Oh,
advisory.
no, 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 that's so funny. No, I do not. I'm on the, advisory board there, and, no, I do not speak German, and, that's funny, I'm on the, advisory board for, German American, and, that's been great too because, they service clients like the type of clients that I have. And so, that's been, a great fit. But no, I do not speak German. I tell you one thing, they are, and you might wanna do some research if you're buying stock. They're a great one to have. They are making some boss moves as far as
Mm,
buying other community banks all across the country. So they are oh, yeah, they're well on their way. But, no, I do not, but I go to their German festivals when they have them.
okay, all right, sounds good. Fantastic. Well, that's great. That's great. Well, this has been exciting. A lot of good information. Learned a little bit about Louisville and why that should certainly be on the radar for investment. So we certainly appreciate you sharing that. And it's good to meet you as well as the only person of color doing her thing up there in Louisville. So that's exciting. Pleasure to meet you in that regard. Any final words you want for our audience before we wrap up for the day? We're just about at time for our discussion.
So I would just say, don't limit yourself. Don't put yourself in a box. People love to, tell you what you can't do. And if you're willing to grind, and do what it takes, I would encourage, you to do whatever you feel like you want to do. So commercial real estate, is definitely in reach and you can do it. You just have to, be willing to put in the work. And, that's what I would encourage anybody to do. If you're thinking about developing, if you're thinking about doing property management, if you're thinking about being a broker and, brokering deals, and, don't let anybody tell you that you don't belong in a room. I go in a room, I know I belong there. And I have the confidence
Mm.
to go into a room. If I'm the only person, I belong there, and that's where God has put me. And I'm gonna do what it takes for you to say, that Bridget, she knows what she's doing. I'm gonna use her next time.
Yeah.
And so it goes.
All right. Well, fantastic. Well, Bridget, it's been great. Certainly keep in touch with us. We'll like to certainly keep eyes on your progress and the successes that you have there in the Louisville market. And thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, and thanks for having me.
All right. Thank you all. So, again, this has been the Mornings with Joel CRE podcast. We want to thank our special guest today, Bridget Owens a matter of fact, before we go, PRG Commercial Property Advisors. What's the best way to reach you, Bridget?
502-387-1957. That's my cell phone number, and that's the best way to get to me.
Okay. All right. And give us the company name again.
PRG Commercial Property Advisors.
Okay. All right. There in Louisville. So certainly appreciate you being with us today. And we look forward to having you all with us next week as well. And thank you so much for being part of the Morning with Joel CRE podcast. Have a great day.